Greetings! Instead of reviewing 2020 as a gaming year, or even reviewing the decade in gaming, I think it's better to review the 8th console gaming generation now that it is coming to a close. All in all, I found the generation to be pretty solid. It was certainly a considerable step up from the disappointing 7th generation. The actual games definitely took their time to get going, so the console spent the first few years on my entertainment system collecting dust. Eventually, I lost my patience with the PS4 and hopped over to the PC. Thankfully, my weak-ass laptop at the time was more than equipped to handle the indie titles on Steam. And what better time than having my first job? With my first paycheck, I got myself both Portal games and a little-known Metroid clone by the name of Environmental Station Alpha, which I highly recommend. By that point, PC gaming was gaining a lot of traction, and the transition to building my desktop PC was made all the easier. This generation was actually the first time I built my own custom PC. I managed to get the very hot GTX 1070 graphics card, fuck you scalpers, and it has served me very well. I had already known about mods and keyboard and mouse controls for shooters, which is why I've never really had anything cross to say about PC gaming, even when I was a console player. But moving full in on PC gaming opened up a whole new world for me. Unlocking the power of my 144Hz monitor was like putting on glasses for the first time. Playing an open world game like The Witcher 3 at 70 FPS and shooters like Doom at 100 FPS was a genuine game changer for me. With the increasing popularity of computers in gaming and the resultant third-party ports to PC, if you see me going back to PlayStation or Xbox as they are now, you have my full permission in advance to call the psych ward on me. Now, as far as generational jumps go, I think the PS4 and Xbox One have brought the fewest changes to the table. It's like seeing a hunter kill the same animal for meat over and over to near extinction and then wonder where they all went. Although my tastes gravitate to this generation over the last, the amount of innovation compared to the last generation has left a lot to be desired. The PS4 had a touchpad on its controller that I used in maybe 3 games in its entire library. In fairness though, this may not entirely be the fault of Sony. It feels as though AAA developers aren't looking for innovative ways to play games, but innovative ways to get more money out of paying customers. It may be due to the fact that development budgets are ballooning up with each generation. I mean, it almost felt like the 7th generation killed off the middle market for the longest time, so it was all or nothing. But between all the early access, the microtransactions, and the crunch time bullshit, it really is only a matter of time before the AAA industry makes like the Fukushima power plant and goes fucking nuclear. As far as the actual consoles are concerned, I regard the PS4 as a disappointment of cyclopean proportions. Not until February of 2015, over a year after its initial launch in holiday 2013, did it receive an exclusive even remotely worthy of consideration. While 2014 wasn't a terrible year for gaming, you could just as easily own the most current titles on a nice little rig. Not to mention, the Wii U was kicking some serious tail that year with Smash Bros. And Bayonetta. Outside of the jankster piece Gravity Rush 2, the PS4 has done nothing to earn my attention since. They can't even slap a pair of titties to get my attention, what with the recent behavior these past 2 years. Look, I have no problem with the existence of cinematic blockbuster games like Uncharted existing, but thanks to the press and indeed the gaming masses praising those games to the degree they have, the PS4 exclusive lineup have been almost nothing but those types of games.
This is like trying to find a bride in a brothel.
Between its ass-backwards GUI, stripping of features from the last console, such as backwards compatibility, and now its censor-happy company, the PlayStation brand as it is now is on my shit list. Not owning the plastic brick in question, I have very little license to say anything on the Xbox One, save for the fact that at night irreversibly fucked its lifetime sales with the initial news. This apparently came as no surprise to PC gamers, but console players did not take too kindly to the Spybox One, and the sales reflect that. Since adding extra features such as backwards compatibility back to the original Xbox days, Microsoft have shifted things back in their favor. Not to mention, there's now the growing in popularity Xbox Game Pass. I actually find it quite curious that they would be the ones to actually threaten Steam's practical monopoly on PC gaming as opposed to Epic, especially after basically abandoning the platform in favor of Xbox. While I'm on about Microsoft, it's dawned on me that consoles have been trying to emulate PC. Unfortunately, the 8th generation brought over the annoying parts of PC gaming. long installation times for games you have the physical disc, and online-only games. That alone made console gaming feel genuinely less convenient for me. It doesn't feel as instantaneous as it used to be. Remember the days that the console BIOS only appeared if the disc wasn't inserted? I'm not saying that it's complicated, but having to go through more steps like this has definitely made console gaming less convenient in my eyes. If I'm going to have the annoyances I thought, I better have the benefits too. Consoles have all but lost the plug-in and play benefits that were once exclusive to them. Console gaming that didn't have Nintendo behind it all but lost me. That's not to say Nintendo had a perfect run, if their Wii U is any indication. While the games on offer certainly commanded better quality when compared to its contemporaries, it lacked the third-party support needed to keep any console afloat. Thankfully, with the rise of the Switch, it seems that Nintendo have learned their lesson. Not only are the exclusive games among my favorites this generation, but it also boasts a wide enough variety of third-party indie titles to make me seriously consider getting the indies on Switch rather than PC. It brought back everything I love about console gaming just for the sheer fact that I haven't had to wait for installations on any game I've purchased, including the colossal in scope Xenoblade 2. That, fellow humans, is a fucking console. As for the games, I've never witnessed a time where things couldn't be worse, but also couldn't be better until the 8th generation showed up. While we've had knockout titles like Ori and the Blind Forest, the reboot of the long-dormant Doom series, and Octopath Traveler, such blights as games as a service, loot boxes, and early access have plagued many a game. Gaining so much negative attention, in fact, that the fucking government made like a fanfiction protagonist and inserted themselves into this mess. As for games as a service, I think my feelings can be best summed up in Accursed Farm's Games as a Service is Fraud video. I'd love to talk about game streaming like what Google attempted with Stadia, but that's a can of worms that's best saved for a whole other video. Whether it's games as a service or game streaming, once the server goes tits up, you don't have the game anymore. What great times we'll be living in, huh?
Go fuck yourself.
Having said that, many of my most beloved franchises made welcome comebacks in the last 7 years. I was convinced that after the disappointing, albeit fun, 5th Soul Calibur entry, that the series would never recover. Much to my delight, I was very wrong. Though Soul Calibur 6 reuses many assets and cranks up the guest character BS to 11, the game as a whole is still a most welcome return to form for the series. I think we can all agree that Resident Evil really turned things around in the 8th generation. With the 7th entry and remake of 2, I think we can rest assured that Capcom have learned their lesson from 5 and 6, mostly. If there's any one company who really got a clue, it was Nintendo. Between Smash Bros., Super Mario, and Zelda, it would appear that Nintendo really learned a thing or two from the last few years of the Wii and the entire lifespan of the fun but ultimately lackluster Wii U. Final Fantasy came back, sort of. 15 eschewed many of the annoyances that plagued its 13th entry in favor of other such bullshit as incomplete storytelling and even less role-playing. The remake of 7 was a baby step in the right direction, but has pacing problems rivaled only by a Commodore 64 load screen. I do still hold the candle for the series though, especially with the very promising looking 16. As far as the new blood is concerned, virtually all the games I played that were new were made by indie developers. The seeds were planted in the tail end of the 7th generation, but during the 8th generation they swung like a bulldozer. I've sung the praises of Super Metroid over social media, and somebody must have had my shit monitored because shortly thereafter, I saw such games as Axiom Verge, Ori and the Blind Forest, and Environmental Station Alpha crop up on the Steam store. While it's certainly a crowded genre, I will take 10 Metroid clones before I take a solitary Call of Duty clone like we've gotten in the whole 7th generation. These days, it would appear that the indies are taking more cues from the Zelda series. Between Crosscode, It'll-Do, and the upcoming Hazelnut Bastille, my classic Zelda fix is being tended to. Smaller developers in general seem to be far more cognizant than their AAA contemporaries of what made gaming in the 80s and 90s so magical. Castlevania was brought back from the dead under the name Bloodstained. I'm frankly indifferent to Ritual of the Night, but Curse of the Moon was the bee's fucking knees. Contra returned under the name Cuphead. I guess all we need now is a successor to Silent Hill. Having killed off virtually every franchise we knew and loved, Konami don't seem terribly eager to give actual gamers anything even resembling a game. Back to discussing the dichotomy of quality in gaming, we also have the recent resurgence of the fighting game genre. While Tekken 7 is mechanically better than the 6th entry, it is extremely DLC heavy, a malady afflicting a considerable number of other fighting games, from Street Fighter to Dead or Alive. We were also fortunate enough to receive the technical marvel of Under Night In-Birth, the most Japanese name you can give to a game without having a single actual word in Japanese. If its presence at EVO is any indication, it would appear that the developers at French Red are getting their just rewards. The FGC have gotten a fair amount of recognition as a whole for that matter. As an unfortunate result, however, many developers have tried to broaden their audience by dumbing down the mechanics and rewarding the player for playing like a concussed amputee. I mean, fuck skill, am I right? Nothing pleases fans like having movesets arbitrarily altered and mechanics outright removed just to accommodate the lowest common denominator. Moving along, I think many of us can agree that this console generation's single greatest year was 2017. Gravity Rush 2, Neo, Sonic Mania, Resident Evil 7, the entire Switch launch, and a certain other game. It genuinely felt like the 8th generation, whatever system you owned, was firing on all cylinders that year. Picking a list of top 10 games from that year was a genuinely difficult exercise for me. This was the point when PC gaming really felt like it was taking off, and developers were putting genuine effort into their PC ports. If modding support can be more widely adopted like it was in Final Fantasy XV, we would be 2 steps from Japanese gaming paradise. The subsequent years following 2017 were certainly solid, but that was when I actually had more time to play a lot of older games due to the sparseness of newer games. I mean, if you look at my reviews of 2018 and 2019, you'll see that a lot of older games arguably get more representation than the games that actually came out in those respective years. For me personally, 2020 wasn't that much better. If you have any doubts that the year wasn't that good, remember that at least 2 of the best received games of the generation this year are remakes of older games. I understand that I have very little license to say this, since I have not played Ghost of Tsushima, Animal Crossing, or Hades. The best games I've personally played this year were also not released in 2020. Some were technically released the year prior to coming to gaming's new cancer, the Epic Game Store. Thank God those hit GOG. I guess computer RPGs have taken up a decent chunk of my time too. Ultima, while dated, calls back to adventure that is frankly long lost in modern gaming. While I'm on that topic, while the new Doom games have brought back the long lost fun from first-person shooters, I still ultimately prefer older Doom for the sheer fact that the game isn't holding you by the nose, guiding you through every step. That doesn't change the fact, however, that Doom Eternal supplants its predecessor in almost every respect, and is my favorite game of 2020. While 2020 wasn't a great year for gaming, I will say it was a much better year to conclude the generation than 2013 when the PS3 and Xbox 360 came to a close. One thing I think we've all noticed is that the 8th generation certainly had no shortage of remakes and remasters. I'm convinced this is why backwards compatibility was completely dropped during the first few years of the 8th generation's lifespan. There were some remasters that I played just because I never got the chance to play them when they initially came out. Granted, most of these were on the Switch, and having them on such a platform had the added convenience of being portable. Let's be honest though, for every Spyro and Wind Waker remaster we got, there were at least 4 Last of Us remasters, half-assed ports to modern systems just to make a quick buck on those who didn't initially buy the games. Upscale some textures and the resolution, and that was basically it for most remasters. Remakes are another story, for better or worse. The remake of Resident Evil 2 is basically everything I could have ever wanted, not only from a remake, but from a follow-up to the fantastic Resident Evil 7. 3 got a remake too, but I can't say that I'm terribly keen on playing it. Final Fantasy VII was also remade, as I've already mentioned. I actually have nothing against remakes, as it generally recaptures the magic of old-school gaming but with the quality of life changes that modern gaming can afford. You can argue it's a lack of innovation on the game industry's part, and you wouldn't necessarily be wrong for thinking so. However, I think of it as something of a wake-up call to the industry at large that this kind of design ethos needs to come back to gaming. But anybody who has seen my top 10 games of 2017 is probably waiting for me to discuss one certain game. A game that has changed my philosophical outlook on life. A game that I still think about to this day. It's coming. It's on its way. I'm sorry. So now we have the 9th console generation to look forward to. The PlayStation 5 is already off to a considerably better start than the Xbox Series X for the fact that it has actual launch titles. But with the Series X not being that far behind the PS5 in total hardware sales, I'm not sure we have a decisive winner this time like we did last generation. Even though the 8th generation was indeed an improvement, I'm not sure the 9th will keep up the momentum. Of course, it's not often a new game genuinely excites me these days anyway. I personally hold little faith that the AAA industry will change their ways. Indies, however, are beginning to evolve to middle market developers, and I am very interested in what they have to bring to the table for the next generation. Whatever awaits us, I am cautiously optimistic. But for now, over and out.